Shall we start then?
Yeah.
All right. I'll just go through what we're doing. Right. Okay. So we're on week number 9 now, everybody, and we're going to be. I'm going to just throw something different at you this evening. I did that just because I thought it'd be nice to work with a bit of colour tonight as well. However, if you're working with your acrylics in the way that we talked about last week, which was with a limited colour palette with, like, say, a bit of blue and a bit of black and white, then carry on with that. You can always have a go at this over the next week, the last week. But yeah, I thought it'd be really cool to get a little bit more painterly expression into the pictures that we've been doing. So as you remember last week, I put some newspaper down, some ink over the top, and the ink changed to kind of a bluish sort of colour. Then bleached out some areas of that as well, and then started to work over with acrylic paint. Now, the artist I've got tonight, as I mentioned, uses very bright colours and works in a very large scale as well. I believe he's an Austrian chap, and he does all sorts of different paintings, but he also has done a series of paintings where he's painted celebrities and things like that, like people from the Rolling Stones or Marilyn Monroe and all that sort of thing. So we're going to have a look at some of his work, and I'm adapting the picture that I've already started last week in using some of these bright colours. I mean, these days you do find quite a lot of brightly coloured portraits and so forth, and we have looked at them in previous classes. So it'll be nice to sort of have a look at that. And if you fancy having a go yourself, you can go for it straight away. Okay, so we'll go over to Studio Wall first of all. Wink. Here we go. So you'll remember this. This is where the most recent stuff has come from. So we've got the bleach, and then I said these look a bit like they've been worked into a little bit more. So we've got some pen on the lady on the right hand side there, and we've got a lot of layers of almost translucent paint over the top of this one, which also has the newsprint or the words hidden behind it as well, which is really nice because you've got all the layering of those techniques. So what I thought we'd look at next, let me just bring these up first of all. So this is where I got to last week. So you remember that I talked about how to tear the newspaper, glue it down, put some glue on top. Then once that's all dry, apply over the top your ink, your Quink Ink, because the Quink Ink reacts beautifully to sanitizer or the bleach. So I took out a lot of the highlights and then started to exaggerate those with the acrylic paints back over the top. So you've got these nice dark tones and very light tones next to them in order to make things pop out of the picture. But I'm hoping we can explore making things pop out even more tonight. So I'm going to hopefully, I should have it here. I'm going to bring up another picture. There it is. So you can see that this is very bright, exuberant, and the artist talked. I listened to an interview with him on YouTube today. His name's Voka, I think it was, and he uses. He wants to get spontaneous energy into his work. So he works in that way with his colours and so forth. One of the things I wanted to mention as well is how do you choose these colours to go on this painting? I think to a point, to a certain degree, it becomes quite spontaneous in that once you've got started, you kind of use a little bit of intuition about where colours go. But if we look closely at these colours, and indeed some of the colours I'm going to show on the next painting, you can see that there are contrasting colours used quite often. So if we look over at this colour wheel just over here, you can see you've got some greens, and on the opposite side, complementary to that, you've got the reds. So you look at this portrait of I think it's Keith Richards, I think, isn't it, from the Rolling Stones. We've got these greens, and then you've got the bright reds just next to it. So contrasting colours there. So if you started with some green, then you might be looking in a painting like this to add some strong reds next to it. And then of course you've got the oranges and the blues. So you've got more sort of just little accents of orange, which helps the picture to pop. And you've got these blues, a little bit on the face and some purpley blues underneath the lips just there, which again, if we look at the colour wheel, contrast each other just there. Now the other side to it, of course, is adding tints, so lightening some colours so that they're not all so intense that they knock against each other so much you can't see the picture. So adding a little bit of white tones the colours down, allows you to add highlights to the face, and also exaggerates or brings out the vibrancy of some of those stronger colours just there as well. And then of course we've got some very dark areas, and these kind of hold the picture together because you're drawn straight into the eyes, under the chin, around the side of the face with those nice deep colours. And then of course we've got the mark making and things which have their own energy added into them. So I'm hoping to do a little bit of work on that. I have started playing around with my picture of this man over here that I was painting last week. So I've gone in a slightly different direction, but I thought it'd be interesting for us to have a look at something a little bit different. So I've got a little bit of a video, so I'm going to play a bit of that for you. I'm not going to play the whole thing because it's about 8 minutes long, so I'm going to try and skip through the video so it goes a little bit quicker. But so you get an idea of what this chap's doing, because it's quite inspiring actually, how he works. So I'm going to put that on now. And go over to the old video player. Alright, so I thought that was really, it's quite eye-opening really, because you can often look at these portraits, can't you, and think, oh, that's a nice little portrait, and then when you see somebody actually working on it, and you just think, wow, that's amazing. And the even nicer thing is to see the way he uses the brushes. There's got a certain energy and movement to them as he goes around the canvas as well. and yeah, you can see all the details in the mark making. One thing I really liked about that was how he was using sort of a palette knife, which was kind of a cement thing. I don't know what it is, but he was using that to scrape the paint on. So I'm looking to have a little play around with some of that on this. You can see I've started just here. I'm using this picture here as my sort of reference for color in this case. So I'm going, as you can see, I've already started putting in some of the reds over there, which is on the right hand side of Andy Warhol, just here, the famous artist, and then I'm bringing in some of the greens on his face. Now, the thing I mentioned before was how the darker colours hold it together a bit. So luckily, I've already done that in our previous lesson. So I've added a lot of the darker colours in, so I can start then working back in with some of the brighter colours, and if I need to, I can come back in with some of the darker bits and so forth. So it's very much looking at the original photograph and seeing what needs to come next, and maybe changing things as you progress as well. And I'm hoping to put in some of those really cool marks that he used with the scraping. So I brought out my palette knives tonight. You don't need a palette knife. You can use a piece of cardboard or something else like that if you want to try out using a palette knife as well. It's really good fun just to see what happens. If you use different sized knives or scrapers, you can get into some of the smaller details or create some texture back over the top of the colours or marks that you put in previously as well. So when I start working on this, what I'm doing is I'm not just going straight in hell for leather with the colour. I'm using some transparent paint, if you like, first of all. So just down here I've got a little bit of green that I slapped on earlier, and I'm adding a little bit of the yellow. My paint's drying really quickly because it's quite warm in here tonight. And then I can add a touch of water, and I can just see how those colours are going to fare when I place them on the top. It means I can see through to the marks that I've done already as well. So it's a nice gentle approach to adding these really strong and vibrant colours like Volk does in that video. And then of course the other thing that you'll remember and be able to see here is how I've used text in here. So there might be areas that I don't touch at all. So I'm not necessarily making a copy or of that particular style you can see on the screen here, but I'm also adapting my own work and creating something hopefully that's a little bit different at the same time. All right, so that's how I'm gonna progress this evening with that. I'll obviously you'll be able to see how I work over this, but I appreciate that some of you might not have got to this stage yet, or you're still working on the bleaching and things like that, and working in as we were with just a colour and some black and white. So I do recommend that you do that first of all, and then if you're feeling brave enough, go in with a bit of colour over the top. If you're not, you could photocopy your piece of work that's like this one, and then you've got a copy that you can work over without having to worry too much about how it's going to turn out, because you've already got your original. That's if you've got access to photocopying. So I'm going to be doing that in a few minutes. We're just going to do a little bit of the scraping over the top here. So here's my palette knife, perhaps a bit of white in there. You can mix the paint with your palette knife as well. And then you can scrape the paint on. Just zoom in a little bit. Zoom right in. There we go. So you can start to scrape areas of colour on, just like on the video back there. I could try a bit. I'll try a bit on the red as well in the background. Add a bit of pink in there. Oh, it's more of a bright red. I can put these marks in there and get that expressive quality. One of the other nice things that I meant to mention about his work there was that he creates this very spontaneous looking background to paint over as well. So in this case, I've used the newsprint a little bit like that artist that we looked at previously with the cultural work. So I can use a different size palette knife on here as well. And applying the colour like this means it's going to be heavier and thicker as well, so you're going to get the vibrancy of the colour that we're perhaps looking for on this. So then, as you can see, the basic idea of this week's work is to paint over the surface that I prepared before. So remember that previously what I'd been doing is I first of all applied some newspaper onto the surface. So I tore up various bits of text from a newspaper and I glued it down with PVA, not just underneath the newspaper but also on top, and then I applied the Quink Ink over that, but actually before that I did apply a thin layer of acrylic paint. So newspaper, PVA, acrylic paint in white, but a thin translucent sort of layer just to sort of tone down the text, and then on top of that I applied the Quink Ink once it was dry. So when that was dry I could then add some highlights using the bleach, and this of course revealed some of the text underneath. Okay, so during this session we're looking at the artwork of Volk, an Austrian painter, and we were working back over the top using bright acrylic paints, very much like the painting you can see on the screen right here. The week before though we were using a limited colour palette of black, white and some blues after putting a wash of colour back over the surface, but I decided today to develop that on a little bit further by using colour. So you can see on this picture of Andy Warhol that I've taken the main part of my inspiration from, that he uses the reds and the greens on the right hand side, just over there, which are opposite colours on the colour wheel, so they kind of complementary and they work quite well next to each other. And then on the other side, mostly around the other side of his face there, Andy Warhol's face, you can see the orange and little bits of red again, contrasting the blue in the background. So he's used the colour theory there to help things stand out. But then you've got other odd bits like a bit of blue just above his left eye there as we're looking at it, and red rimmed glasses and so forth. So some of the colours later on creep across the picture and help it to bind together. So the other thing I think works, helps it to work, is the darker tones in there. So you've got some deep blues and purples, adding contrast to those colours in there too. And the other side of it, of course, is adding in some tints into the picture too. So the tints being adding a little bit of white to the paint. So you've got the pale blue next to the darker blue, the pale pink next to the red, and the lighter yellows around those sort of deeper golden yellows around the face there. So a really interesting painting or style of work to look at to develop our pieces of work. So as I said, there's no point in me saying I'm going to create a painting just like his, but what I am doing is taking inspiration from the video that we just watched a few minutes ago. So I've decided to add scraped areas to get some of that texture, and gradually, being a little bit cautious, I suppose, adding some very gentle layers of colour over the top of the dark background that I've already got there, and then occasionally coming in and scraping some paint. The nice thing about scraping wet paint on the surface is that you can add texture, but also you can remove colour where you feel it's a little bit strong at the time of applying it. So you can have a lot of fun building up those beautiful layers of colour in here, and I did enjoy adding the texture on here. And again, the thing to keep an eye out for is adding highlights and adding shadows, creating contrast between the different planes and features on the face to make things stand out and look three-dimensional and so forth, and give it some form and modelling in there as well. So you can see me just using the old palette knife over here around the face, and I think you'll find if you do this that you may add some bright colours, or you might add some colours on here and you think, gosh, that's really strong and bright, but then as the paint dries and you look back at it later, you might find that it looks quite pale, or too dark or too light or whatever. So the paint does, or your perception of what you're looking at does change as you work on the piece, but that's all part of the fun of it, and building up the surface of the picture, which I really did enjoy doing on here. So looking at this picture, what I would probably do, I mean, it does look a bit wide on here as well, the overall portrait. The other thing is there's a slight sort of tilt to his head, which I don't feel I've captured quite as much in the drawing, but it's not too bad, is it? It's quite close, so I'm pretty pleased with it. So as you saw just a moment ago, the nice thing about this particular photograph is that we've got he's got lovely dark skin there, but also the background is lovely and bright, so that allows some room to add some very strong, striking highlights into the background to bring out the portrait overall. And then, of course, to add some texture to it. So this area in the background has allowed me to add and create some texture and layers of colour and have a bit of fun there, as well as on the face. So just here I'm starting to, on that side of the face there where I'm working, I'm trying to build up a little bit of the texture on the surface of the skin there where his beard is, going down the side there. So I'm doing perhaps a little bit more stippling down that side, and then I've worked back over the top and keeping an eye on the highlights for the jawline at the same time. So remember the good thing about these paints, acrylics, is they will dry very quickly, so that's going to allow you to build up another layer on top quite quickly within a few minutes. Especially if it's quite warm in the room you're working in, you'll be able to apply another layer of colour back over the surface of the area you've recently worked on. So that's good, isn't it? A bit more flexibility with the paint as well. So you saw I have used some black in here as well, which is what I used the previous week on here. So to get those really deep areas of shadow, I've applied black to whatever colour I'm using on there as well. So you can see that I've got some nice contrast just underneath the jawline against the highlights on the jaw as well, and the lovely bright beard. I used a sort of small round brush to add some of the fine hairs on the whiskers, on his chin and so forth, and I probably would go back later as well and work into those to make them more pronounced. The bearded area is an area I did work on quite a bit, but then I know that I needed to come back and do some more work on it. And you'll see me in a little while just working around the side of his beard. There we go. Working around the side of his moustache, adding some of the texture, the fuzziness, if you like, around there as well, to soften that edge and make it look more like his beard. And now here what I'm doing is I'm adding some extra strong highlights to the overall face, such as the eyes and so forth. And then I saw that on the Andy Warhol there were these nice pinks in there, you know, so that kind of, it goes well with the oranges that we've been using, although on the screen here they look quite brown in actual fact, but with a little bit of pink in there, it gives it a little bit more energy as well. So I hope you've enjoyed watching the lesson this week, and I'll see you in the next lesson. Thanks very much.